Hello and welcome to the Fedora Files. I'm Gregory Fedora, and with me today is a great guest with some cool stories that we're about to hear. Is Bob Scappini, and just to let you know, he's up in Gettysburg restoring walls, and that's all I'm going to say. But first off, thank you for coming on. I'm really excited about this.
My pleasure. Thank you. I'm excited too.
Yeah. So, um, the walls of Gettysburg. I've been to Gettysburg many times, and there's tons of walls, and I mean, they're
Yes.
old walls and they're crumbling, and you're going
Yes.
in and fixing these things. How did you even get into that? Like,
To start the story, let's go back
yeah.
to I have a young son,
Hmm.
and he requires community service. So we're back in Rhode Island, and my wife reads an article about folks needed to restore historical cemeteries. I thought that was fantastic. So we signed
Hmm.
up, and the next thing you know, we're going into the woods, discovering 17th, 18th, and 19th century cemeteries that have been overgrown. So we cut down the brush, uh, write the headstones up again, and one of the particular things you have to do is restore the walls that are around a cemetery. This is called the sacred space. In other words, it's the consecrated ground in which the bodies can be buried. My son, of course, the interest waned quickly as far as community service went. So I stuck around and hooked up with a team of Portuguese wall builders. And over the course of the next couple of years, I learned how to restore or rebuild walls without the use of any kind of cement or masonry work. Fast forward, I retired from teaching after 30 years, and we relocated to Gettysburg. I signed up one day to help with the battlefield, and the ranger said, "Does anybody have additional skills that we could utilize?" And I said, I can restore stone walls. And they were like, "Really? Are you?" That's fantastic. So they drove me out to a location. It was next to the Alabama monument. And
Hmm.
this particular wall was put together by German POWs. And
Okay.
they didn't have their heart in it. I mean, it was just rocks on top of rocks. So for the next 6 months, I reestablished the wall, put in the foundation rocks, uh, arranged it so that water and snow wouldn't deteriorate it any further. The Park Service said, you've got a real talent for this. And that began my whole life here in Gettysburg. So,
I mean, that's fascinating. I mean, it's cool. Like, I'm big into history and like the stories of preservation, and I
mhm.
love like keeping the stories alive because I'm not able to actually do what you do. I could not build. I'd probably make it worse. And but but the fact that you're keeping these walls that's part of our history and not just American but world history in general because it's important to keep preserve these things so people
Right.
know where they are, what went on. So as you're doing this, I just get, have you run into like some interesting like things have you found? Like what have you found as you were like restoring these walls? Because I'm sure like they're old and they were there during the war. So
Actually, there are three types of walls. There
okay.
are defensive walls used during the battle. There are
Mhm.
farm walls that define properties and try to keep in livestock. And then there is something we call dump walls, which are just rocks that are thrown off after a field has been plowed. So, in the process of putting together well, we'll call them farm walls or some of the dump walls, I have come across entire um, kits of lunch material left by farmers. So ceramic bowls, dishes, um, anything that they would bring out to the workers that they would, have a ceramic bowl and tie it up something, and but they would leave it on the wall or leave it inside the wall. Now, for a waller, someone who builds walls, the tradition is if you leave something in the wall, it's kind of like leaving a little bit of yourself there.
Hmm.
So the Portuguese would always leave a coin, a simple
Hmm.
coin underneath the top rock to say that they had been there. So
Hmm.
um, I could see where some of the wall people, wall workers would do that. Now, as far as the battlefield goes, the park personnel are very particular about some of the things.
Hmm.
So one day I'm working behind the Pennsylvania monument and starting to rearrange some of the rocks. And all of a sudden I hear ding, 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 ding. I was like, that doesn't sound like a rock. So I disassembled the rock, and there at the bottom is a cannonball. I was like, hey,
Wow.
wow. So I take the cannonball, I put it in a plastic bag. I mark the position with fluorescent paint, and as fast as I can, I run back to the ranger station. I said, look what I found. And they're like, okay. So it's like, oh my God, I'm all excited about this. How come you guys aren't? Because we see it all the time. So don't worry about it.
That's that's wild.
Conversely, conversely, there's a lot of interaction with the public. One time I was working by General Meade's headquarters, and I'm placing the stones so that they come at an angle so they can articulate up. A man stops his car, rolls down the window, and says, "Do you know General Meade had his foot on that stone when he was thinking about the battle?" And I thought, I didn't know that. What have you found? Now, these are active farms, so if you don't have garbage collection, you'll throw it out the window. And I
Hmm.
looked down at my garbage pit here and I said, it's a bottle of Pepto Bismol. I said, okay. Another time, an elderly woman pulls up with her Ford Fairlane and she rolls down the window and she said, could you do me a favor? I, I said, what could I do? She goes, could you make sure the green part of the stone faces out towards the road? Because I like to look at that. I said, all right, I'll try.
That's awesome. That's, I mean, that's so cool. Now, you were telling me before we started this that the history of Gettysburg, I mean, it's not just the battle. There's stuff further back that you've come across, and I think that's fascinating. Can you go over like some of that? Like how far back historically? I know, I mean, the world's been around, but I mean, like, what is there at Gettysburg
Sure. Mhm.
beyond the that you've come across or know about?
Gettysburg is very unique because the history goes back to prehistory. So you could find in slate that's used in brick walls, you can find dinosaur footprints. When I was working on one particular wall, I came across um, holes that were made by Native Americans as they tried to shape the rock. So they would use it to grind, and you would
Hmm.
see the impressions in the rock. Um, Gettysburg is unique in its history because it is literally layer upon layer of history. So you can find the dinosaur stuff, you can find Native American stuff. There's also been reports of meteorites striking the earth here. Um, so history is this layered approach here in Gettysburg, and that's what
Hmm.
makes it very, very unique. It is an active historical location. And the
Hmm.
battle is this large chunk of time that's taking place here. But if you go past that and if you go before that, you will find amazing, amazing examples of not only American history, but of natural history.
Hmm. So, what is one of the most like since being at Gettysburg? What's something one of the most fascinating things you've discovered about Gettysburg to you that you've found this?
For me, I'm also an author and I've written fiction and nonfiction. One of the articles that I wrote for a local magazine is the fact that there are over 110 inventors that came from Adams County.
Hmm.
Um, something as simple as the jack. We think of today the jack that we lift up our car when we change our tire. Well, the jack was developed here in Gettysburg to repair wagons. We have five crossroads that are coming into Gettysburg. So there was a lot of work being done on wagons. And in order to
Mhm.
replace a wagon or an axle or work on it, you needed some way of lifting up the wagon. And they had this wooden jack that came from this part of Pennsylvania. So very inventive, very creative people. There was so much flooding going on by the rivers that this one farmer came up with a fence that actually, when the water rose up, the slats of the fence would go up and then it would come back down after the
Oh wow.
floodwaters receded. Also tied to agriculture. Gettysburg is a cross section of America in its most inventive and creative form.
Hmm. That's very cool. Now I'm also curious. I know you found the cannonball.
Yes.
Um, what is another thing that you've like as you've been working that you've come across that just like floored you that you found that you're just like, oh my gosh, this is wild.
Uh, the fact that, again, we don't have regular garbage collections. So
Hmm.
the farmers collected all their trash, their refuse, in one place. So I'm working in at a farm connecting one piece of land with another piece of land with some wall work. And I would come across the farmer's trash. So literally, it was a spring mattress. It was utensils. It was rock. It was bottles. It was all kinds of stuff that we think of today as artifacts, but it's
Hmm.
trash to them. So they would just throw it in there. Um, as far as any material stuff that I have found, um, I was working up near Pickett's Charge.
Hmm.
Now, to me, this is sacred ground and nothing could ever take place here. And I'm digging a hole for a post that the park wants to put in for a fence. And suddenly I drove into the ground. And next thing you know, there's this great plume of gas. And I thought, oh my God, what have I done? Have I ruptured a gas main or something like that? No, what it turns out is that during World War I, they had Camp Colt, and this was where the tank battalions were stationed. And they put in sewer lines to accommodate the troops. And
Hmm.
when they left, they just clogged it up. And when I broke through, poof, I got a whiff of the methane gas. So
Oh wow.
that was my experience.
That's it. I mean, that's just crazy like that, during World War One, they had or World War Two, they had those there. Now you'd mentioned that the German POWs
Yes,
helped, so that I'm assuming that's during World War Two. And
yes,
that's interesting that they brought them over to do that. I know other stories about like German POWs, being down in Atlanta and stuff like that, and they were just sort of walking around, and
yes.
so was that a similar situation where they were up there kind of walking around, but they had to do this job or
Okay,
like
according to the Geneva Convention,
yeah.
prisoners of war should be placed in a light environment. So you're not going to transport them to the desert Southwest. They found
Hmm.
that because Gettysburg had a military park, they can then utilize the military aspect. So the Corps of Military Police established a POW camp here at Gettysburg. About 2,800 POWs. They are regular Wehrmacht troops. Now, the
Hmm.
Waffen SS, the Fanaticals, were placed down in Maryland, separating the
Hmm.
two. Now, the farmers, oh, damn,
Yep.
I'm sorry, I lost
Oh, you're still there. I still see you.
really?
Yeah, yeah, I
I'm
can
sorry
still see
about
and
the
hear you.
technology.
Oh, it's all good.
Okay.
I mean, I still hear and
Uh,
see you. So.
okay. Well, the POWs were allowed, the German POWs were allowed to go out to fields, local farms, and pick peaches and grapes, apples, and they were given commissary change to go and buy some cigarettes or stuff like that. So
Oh
the
wow.
um, the fact that they were able to walk around. I've heard stories about German POWs coming back and saying, what a great time they had here.
Hmm. So I wonder if any of them immigrated over later and moved
Don't know about
because I
that,
know
but
there's a yeah.
there was that the ability to speak German in the area, so there was that
Yeah.
too. So, and I think they were
Yeah.
glad to be out of the war. So,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and
That's
there were
understandable.
only 8 or 9 Japanese POWs that were here, so
Oh, okay.
um, they just didn't surrender.
Hmm. Yeah, they didn't. They had a different mindset
Different
to
mindset.
it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. So now, I mean, you're retired and you're doing this to help
yes.
present. Now, are you? Do you have a group that you're training to take over or continue this? Because, like, I know you're doing it now, and you could probably do it another 20, 30 years, but like, eventually, like, who's going to take over for you to keep this going? Like, because I mean, I'm assuming like you could work for another 40 years, and there's still going to be walls up there that need repair
Sure.
and like stuff.
There's
Like, I'm
35
just curious.
miles. There's about 35 miles of stone wall at the park.
Okay.
Um, I have to, let's see, I've done 2 miles worth of stretch. It takes a couple of years to do something like that. It is very difficult to get a volunteer to come out and to lift heavy rocks. I mean,
Hmm.
why would you be out in the hot sun picking up heavy objects?
True.
But I enjoy that because it is an exercise. It's a Zen exercise for me.
Hmm.
Creating a freestanding wall that has nothing to hold it together except the tension and compression from the other rocks is amazing.
Yeah.
And I enjoy doing that.
Oh. Well, I'm glad you do, because like if not, that we'd be losing this is history. And I do find it interesting, like you're talking about the trash, and now it's artifacts. And I think
Right.
there was like a joke. It might have been in an Indiana Jones movie where he said, take this watch, like this $10 watch, and it's nothing now, buried in the
Exactly.
sand, and 1,000 years later, it's priceless.
Priceless.
And
And
yeah.
um, you know, the artifacts that remain in the sacred space of the battlefield are there forever. They'll never be
Mhm.
disturbed. Um,
Okay.
but if you go outside the battlefield, there are many farms that were either hospitals or supply depots or something, and they will contain something of the battle. And folks like to have something to touch, that
Hmm.
tactile connection to the battle. So I'm just grateful that the park rangers have given me an opportunity to be part of this enormous effort. Folks don't realize that there are only 8 full-time maintenance people working at the park at any given time. They
Oh
have
wow.
seasonal help, but they rely on volunteers to go out and cut brush and fix fences and stone walls.
Hmm. Now I'm curious. I would be dumb not to ask this because you're at Gettysburg and everyone always talks about the ghosts of Gettysburg and the hauntings. Have you ever been out there working on something and seen or heard something that you're just like, what was that? And I can't explain it. Have you ever run across that?
I have never been run across or heard anything that was unusual or unnatural. And I've heard all the stories, and I I just haven't seen it or just have not been privy to it. I I have to tell you one story. I was working, and I take a radio with me for company, and I like to
Hmm.
listen to rock and roll. And got the radio turned up, and next thing you know, there's an old elderly couple in back of me, and the woman looks at me and she says, you should be more respectful. And I said, excuse me, what do you mean? She goes, well, you have that radio on awfully loud. This is a battlefield. I said, I understand, but the music drowns out the dead. So she just kind of stopped, grabbed her husband, and said, let's go.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I had asked though because like I've talked to other ghost people and they're always talking about it. And I've been to Gettysburg and I've only
Mhm.
seen some weird things, but like then again, you like when you go up there thinking about it and looking for it, you kind of find it. And Like
You
so, I
set
think
your frame of reference, yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. When you're like up there and you're like ghost hunting, and then you have like
Yes.
you hear things, and you're I mean you're gonna hear things, but you're too busy restoring things. So like the
And
ghosts
I'm
keep walking by you, and you don't even pay attention to them, and you're
I
playing your
usually
rock and roll.
yeah, I usually do my thing early in the morning, so I avoid the heat of the day. So
Yeah,
I'm not in tune to that. So
yeah, and the ghosts don't get up in the morning. They're night owls, man.
exactly.
Yeah, they're like we don't want to be up. They're like late risers. So, but I, I thank you for what you're doing because that's just to me amazing, and we need a lot more people like you doing that because there's a lot of places around. I know the Alamo's in the process of doing some major restorations because
Hmm.
my buddy I had it on, he was talking about that a few months ago, and so the fact that they're restoring these things, I think is phenomenal. I think what you're doing is just mind blowing. And like, I wish I knew how to do stuff like that. Like I can barely take care of my
A
house. And, but,
few years ago, we had a conservation group from South Carolina come up, and I was training them how to restore historic walls. And one young lady, it was like this isn't clicking for her. And she said, what's my motivation? What's my reason for being here? I looked at her and I said, you have to understand, no one can do what you do. No one can just drop in and start doing something on the battlefield. You've been
mhm,
given a unique opportunity to help history be preserved. And by doing this, you are establishing something that's going to be here for another 100 years. Because that's what the Park Service asks. They said, if you're going to build a wall, make sure it's there for 100 years.
mhm,
So when I restore a wall, I try to make sure that those pieces that fit together are as tight as a jigsaw puzzle. So she looked at me and she says, something, you're absolutely right. I've been given an opportunity. So um, I don't know if they'll, after I'm gone, they're going to have a Waller come in, or, import somebody from Portugal. But it's a way for me to pay back to to history. I was a history teacher for 30 years. My sphere was Rhode Island. So anything I could do to help my students understand history better is to get them out of the classroom, go out into the streets of our town, and walk around in history. And that's how you remember history.
mhm. Yeah, you learn like when you see it and experience it, you learn it far better than just reading it. Like
Oh,
I know I
absolutely.
do. Like going like like I can read all I want, and like until I actually go somewhere, I don't fully get that ingrained in me. But yeah, that's why I love going up to Gettysburg. It really like reminds me of stuff, and especially
And
walking around the
like you
town
say,
and
there
see that.
exactly. I mean, there's a cannonball on the wall, and there's a cannon embedded in the street, and over
Hmm.
here are some bullet holes. Uh, Sometimes you take it for granted that history is wrapped around the town. It's
Hmm.
also a place where you can energize your creativity. I know that when I'm in the process of writing a book or something like that, I go to the battlefield to energize myself, to get those, to try to connect with what I see and what I hear. It's a great and unique opportunity for me, and I'm grateful for it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, again, I really appreciate what you're doing. I want to thank you for also coming on my show because I
My
know
pleasure.
you didn't have to. You could have been like no, or busy, because everyone's lives are busy. So anytime someone
I've
comes
heard
on, I really appreciate it. So
I've heard so much about your broadcast, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
oh, great. Well, I hope maybe you can come back on again, like if you find some cool stuff, or as you expand and do more, if you find more interesting things. I'd love to have you back and hear more because I'm sure you got many more stories you haven't shared. And but I'd like to.
Okay.
I even like some of the stuff of the cemeteries you did before. That'd be interesting to hear those
Oh,
situations and
those
what
are
that was all about.
yes, I spent a lot of time in the emergency room because of poison ivy.
Oh, wow. Nice. And those of you who are watching, listening, however you found me, I want to thank you for checking us out. And please continue to come back. And as always, stay safe and keep searching.
The Fedora Fans. Check out fedoracrt.com today.